All right, good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to the Baker Diversity Lecture Series. I am Nicole Cook. I am the Augusta Baker Endowed Chair at the School of Information Science at the University of South Carolina. And welcome to today's program. I'm so excited that we're going to be able to continue our conversation with NALCO members, that is the National Association of Librarians of Color. And today we're talking with Reforma. So excited that we can continue this conversation. We ask that everyone remains muted, and we will have time for questions with our guest at the end, but please also feel free to enter your questions into the chat box. We will keep track of them. And finally, as I do every session this semester, I want to acknowledge Kenya Flash and LaTanya Jenkins, two of our sister librarians that left us too soon, and we dedicate our conversations this semester to them. So welcome. And I want to acknowledge my doc students and my graduate assistants, Sierra Harris and Kiara Vargas. Always grateful for their assistance. And I'm going to turn it over now to Kiara, who is going to introduce our guests and moderate our conversation today. So again, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Great day to you all. My name is Kiara Vargas, and I have the privilege to introduce Mr. Nicanor Diaz. He is the Immigrant Services Manager and Neighborhood Service Manager for the Denver Public Library. He has worked in libraries since 2005, including a 6-month practicum at the Argentina National Library in Buenos Aires. He has been involved with Reforma since 2007 as a member, as a chair of the Transition Committee, as president of the Colorado chapter of Reforma, and now he's serving a 2-year term as Central Chapter Representative, and he is also the president of Reforma National, where he works closely with the executive committee and the board of directors to further Reforma's missions and values. Currently at the Denver Public Library, he manages cultural inclusivity department, which coordinates all of the Denver Public Library's immigrant services to include their signature programs called Plazas. Additionally, he manages 4 branches in Northwest Denver, and he works closely with senior librarians to ensure that our branches provide services and programs to their communities. I welcome you, Mr. Diaz.
Thank you so much, Kara. Thank you everyone for being here today. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and I'm assuming the question that we hear at all of these, everybody can see this okay? Perfect. Well, thank you again for having me. My name is Nicanor Diaz, and like in the introduction, I work with at the Denver Public Library as the Immigrant Services Manager and Northwest Neighborhood Services Manager. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about serving multicultural communities, kind of what my experience have been over the last 15 years. I'll do just a brief introduction of how I got to where I am today. I want to touch a little bit about the Plaza program that we have at the Denver Public Library, which I think is a really good role model for serving multicultural communities. And then I want to talk a little bit about some additional resources in case you're interested in learning more or would just like to grow your network. Talk a little bit about some of the different NALCOs, and then really dive in a little bit more into Reforma and what Reforma is doing for our members and for the community as a whole. So the Denver Public Library in Colorado, we have 27 branches. We're getting ready to open our newest branch, Art Park, which is located in the River North District. We serve not only the city and county of Denver, but also the adjacent cities, Lakewood, Wheat Ridge, Aurora, total for a combined population of about 3 million and a very diverse population. I think something that is happening in Denver that I think a lot of you might be also seeing in your cities is a lot of gentrification and a lot of folks being pushed out, where we used to have large immigrant communities living within the city and county of Denver. Those communities have been pushed out and now are living in the surrounding communities, Aurora, Colorado being one of the most diverse that we have in our area. I like Kira said, I began working at the High Plains Library District in Northern Colorado back in 2005. I started as a clerk, and I didn't really know that I wanted to get into libraries, but I do remember a very specific interaction that I had with a customer who was a parent that would come to the library with her 2 children, and she only spoke Spanish. And I think at the time I was the only Spanish speaker working at that branch. And the customer had been using libraries for a while, but was used to walking up to the front desk and looking at her children to kind of initiate that transaction with the library staff and use her children as translators for her needs to use the library. Picking up on that, I quickly looked at the mother and just started speaking Spanish with her, and her face just lit up, knowing that now there was somebody at the branch that she could communicate with in her own language without having to put that burden on her children. At that point, I realized that there was a lot of work that needed to happen in order to serve our Spanish-speaking community better. And for the first couple of years, when I was at High Plains, I mainly focused in providing assistance to Spanish speakers. I was introduced to Reforma, and I became very active with the Colorado chapter. And it wasn't until a little bit later in my career that I realized that really there were other folks that needed to be helped other than just the Spanish speakers. Let's see, I was with High Plains until 2014 as working as a librarian. I graduated from the University of Denver in 2011, where the program really didn't have anything in terms of serving multicultural communities other than an extracurricular class that was taught by Dr. Camila Alide, who's a past ALA president, and past Reforma national president. It was, I would say, the best class that I had at DU, but definitely there was a lack of instruction or teaching around being prepared to serve multicultural communities. In 2014, I got a job at the Denver Public Library as a senior librarian or branch manager in one of the Southwest branches that was predominantly Spanish and Vietnamese speaking. And that's kind of where I started picking up on the idea that, you know, helping Spanish speakers is great, and we need to do more to help everyone, not just focus on Spanish speakers. At that point, I was introduced to the Plaza Program, which we were starting it at the Athmar Park branch, and it's really a program that helped, it's geared towards immigrants and refugees, and some of the services that we offered, we'll touch a little bit later, but it was truly a one space in the branch where there were multiple activities happening at the same time. We had staff that spoke many different languages, kind of facilitating some of these programs or building relationships or doing one-on-one with folks. We were doing this in, I think, 10 locations throughout the Denver metro area back at that time. And the program was really starting to gain some traction and to grow. By the time that I started in 2014, the program had been running in its iteration because it adapts to the community needs, which is another good thing about the program. Probably I would say for about 7 years before I started. And when I started, we were able to secure a grant that would ensure that we could continue with the program for the next 5 years. So this gives you an idea of what the Plaza program looks like. We provide services that were conversation tables, citizenship study sessions, and then there was an arts and craft component to the Plaza program, because we recognized that a lot of times family members would come to the programs, and we wanted to make sure that a parent could also work together with their child without having to worry about childcare or what their kids were doing. And so oftentimes this kind of grew organically into an intergenerational program where you had sometimes 2 or 3 different generations working on different things in the same room. And another thing that kind of grew organically from this Plaza program that it wasn't our intention, but it certainly happened, was when we had more than 2 generations working, we would sometimes see a grandparent working with a grandchild during an arts and crafts, and the parent would be doing some language preservation and cultural preservation. Because we heard from a lot of the grandparents that they were afraid that their children or their grandchildren would lose their language or would lose a sense of their culture, where they came from after they had moved to the United States. And so then we purposely started sharing a lot more culturally related activities that could help those grandparents keep their culture and pass on their traditions to their grandchildren. One of the other things that the Plaza program does is we looked at some of the barriers that we had, and we were always trying to remove some of those barriers so that it makes it easier for our participants to be able to attend, participate, and get the help that they need. Also, I just want to quick preface, this is all pre-COVID. This is up until we had to shut down for COVID. Obviously, I'll go back. This picture is not something that we would have been doing in the last couple of years. Obviously, there's no mask usage and no social distancing. So I just want to make clear that this was a picture that was taken, I think, around 2019, right before COVID. So yeah, we don't require registration. We don't require library cards, nothing like that. We have, again, we hire our activity leaders that are the folks that run the programs. We hire them from the communities that we serve. So there's also like this community building that happens during the Plaza program. Obviously that has changed a little bit since we transitioned virtually because of COVID. It took a lot of thinking and decision making to try to get to where we are today with the program. But we understood that we didn't want to leave these communities without resources and help when they most needed it. And at the same time, we also understood that by transitioning our program virtually, we were creating technological barriers that not everybody would participate. Right now, like for example, this is one of the, this is what a class typically would look like. We try to keep them intentionally small so that we can give more individual attention as we work with people. But we do understand that technology is a big barrier and then not everybody could participate in these. And we are starting to slowly bring back the Plaza program in person, kind of like a hybrid mode. We're opening it up at some of the branches where we can do one-on-one appointments for now. We're still not bringing back together those big classroom style programs, but we're doing more one-on-one programs where, again, folks that don't have the technological equipment or the way of navigating it, but still need to get a driver's license or still need to apply for some sort of program or job or something, that we can be there to help them with whatever it is that they need. So some of the appointment services that we're focusing on right now are English, citizenship, job searching, homework help, which is an interesting one, and legal help. And I say the homework help one was interesting because the Plaza program, as its first iteration, was never really meant to do any homework help. But we noticed that Denver Public Schools was not assisting immigrants that were moving into this country or this area, the city of Denver. They weren't providing the help that their children needed in order to succeed in schools. And through folks coming to the Plaza program and sharing their experience with their community, we started noticing at our branches that are closer to Aurora, a huge increase in number of kids, mostly from Somalia, that were coming to the Plaza program asking for help with homework help. And because our motto is, with whatever you need, we'll help you with, we obviously we refer people when it comes to more in-depth legal help, because we're not attorneys. But with something with homework help, we felt like we needed to help them at that point, and we didn't want to give them that experience that they came to us asking for help, which is huge for someone who isn't from this country. And we didn't want to deteriorate that relationship by saying, oh, we can't help you here. Let me give you a piece of paper with resources, and then put that ownership back on the person. So we started noticing that at these locations, on the days that we had Plaza, we would have anywhere between 40 to 50 kids that would come. And at that point, we had to increase our recruitment, and we opened up, we recruited some volunteers that could do a little bit more homework help with those kids. But again, our intention was never to turn them away. We wanted to help them with what they needed. And that's why I say the Plaza program is a little bit dynamic, and it changes throughout the years, because their needs change, and we want to be ready to adapt to those changes. This is our activities leader. These are the folks that, along with some of our staff members, these are the folks that run the Plaza program. In any given Plaza program, we would have anywhere between 5 to about 7 activity leaders, some of them working one-on-one with customers, and others leading conversation groups or citizenship studies sessions. I want to acknowledge the fact that the Denver Public Library is fortunate that we have a grant that allows us to pay the activity leaders for the work that they do. We don't, while we supplement some of that work with volunteers, we understand the work that they're doing, and we want to compensate them as much as the grant will allow us to, and at the same time, allow us to extend the longevity of the grant. We have a very finite amount of money. We want to be able to help our community, and at the same time, we want to recognize the work that our activity leaders are doing and compensate them for that. Our activity leaders will work anywhere between 2 up to 20 hours a week. It's very flexible, and it fits their needs. And I'm saying that this because this is a model that can be adapted to any situation. If you have the funding to do this at 5 locations, go for it. If you don't, if you have the fundings to do it at 1 branch, it can be scalable. But I think it is important that if any of you are doing a program like this or considering a program like this, is to be able to pay the staff that are working in there what they deserve for the work that they're doing. So right now, the Plaza program, again, we're slowly transitioning, trying to go back to in-person. We're expanding as much as we can with branches. We're also hiring more permanent, less staff that work anywhere between 2 to 20 hours, and we're trying to hire more staff that are working set 20 to 40 hours. So there's a little bit more continuity there with the program, and also the staff members would be eligible for benefits and raises. The structure, the pay structure for the Denver Public Library can be a little bit odd, and those folks that work less than 20 hours a week don't really get raises. And we want to make sure that we can fix that and include them in that process, so that the wages that we're paying them obviously will fall behind inflation, but don't fall as much behind as if they didn't get any raises. Another really important aspect of serving multicultural communities is outreach and partnerships. And for this, I want to touch a little bit about the cultural inclusivity department that I have. In this department, I work with 7 other staff members. I have the Plaza Program manager, so there is someone who manages the entire Plaza program. I have a cultural inclusivity services coordinator, and this is a very important position in the Denver Public Library because they collaborate with the 27 branch locations throughout the city and county of Denver and create program that are culturally inclusive and that reflect all of the communities that we serve in the Denver Public Library. And this is an interesting position because we created it without really knowing how this position would evolve, but I'm pretty happy with where we are today with the position. The person in that position, her name is Nagam Swati, and she used to work as an activity leader for the Plaza Program. And one of the things that Nagam had noted when I first started working at the library was that we would do traditional programs, like I'm sure all of you have done this at some point or maybe have thought about it, but like during Dia del Niño, Dia del Libro, or Day of the Children, Day of the Book that happens the last Sunday in April, a lot of people would just do like piñata making programs. And they would be like, cool, we did the program for Spanish speakers, we did a piñata kit, and we just moved on. And Nagam was like, well, it's great to do a program like that. Really what we need to be targeting is like the importance of piñatas in that culture. It can't just be that we're gonna take this program and do a piñata making kit. We really need to have a conversation about what that means for the culture that we're trying to work with. And so then from there, we created this idea of the cultural inclusivity, where Nagam now does this very intentional programming that is not just about creating piñatas, again, to give an example, but it's more about delving into the culture and celebrating the culture. So she, some of the programs that she does that serve multicultural communities are, we just wrapped up a celebration around the Lunar New Year. She does a program around World Refugee Day that has been very successful, mostly around food. Food is always a really big connector, but in the last couple of years, what we have done is identified immigrant-led businesses that we have hired to come to the library to do programs where we pay them, and they also get the opportunity to promote their services. She's also working on doing some AAPI programming. She led a candlelight vigil last year in November to remember the victims of the Sand Creek Massacre. We did a vigil where we walked from the steps of the Central Library to the steps of the Colorado Capitol. So she is doing a lot of really good work. And I also want to highlight the work that she's doing kind of supplements the Plaza program, because oftentimes we think of serving our immigrant community or our multicultural communities as just providing English classes or providing citizenship classes. And libraries need to move away from saying that you're serving your community if all you're doing is that. We also have to give them what I call like fun programs, or programs that celebrate their culture. We can't just offer remedial services where all they're doing is just learning something. We have to give them the opportunity to come into the library and it be a space where we're celebrating their culture along with them. Which brings me out to outreach and partnerships, where we obviously, in order to be able to promote our services, we have a lot of partners throughout the city and county of Denver. Particularly for the Plaza program, we've partnered a lot with an organization called CIRC, which is the Colorado Immigrants' Rights Coalition, where together we will do a huge N400 drives. And N400s are the USCIS applications that legal permanent residents would file in order to become naturalized citizens. And then there's a whole test that you have to take at one of the USCIS offices. But these are large events where we can get anywhere between 50 and 100 people to become naturalized citizens. And the main reason why we're helping folks to do this is because you have to update your legal permanent residency every 10 years, and it's pretty expensive. And at the same time, these folks, once they become naturalized citizens, they have the ability to vote, which is pretty powerful. Outreach, obviously, is another great way for us to be able to connect with community members that might not know what the library has to offer or where the libraries are. And again, this is, we partner closely with our mobile services department. and we're pretty intentional about the places where we target our outreach events, particularly serving immigrants and refugees or multicultural communities. We've found success in going to apartment buildings in areas of Denver that are close to Aurora, where we can take our Plaza program into their apartment lobbies. And that has been pretty successful too. Again, most of the work that we see during those Plaza programs are homework help. But it's great. If that's what those folks need, then that's what we will be there to provide. Another really important aspect is we can have all the programs we want that'll bring folks in. We can have all the partnerships in the world, do all the outreach, but I think it's really important for us to also focus on our collection development. This is a picture of our Schlesman branch, which again is close to Aurora. The Denver Public Library recently, I want to say maybe like a year and a half ago, hired a collection development librarian to really focus on our world languages collection. And she sent me a quote about a dad that walked into the Schlesman branch and was asking for something for their second grader to read. And the staff there showed them, and I'm sure you can tell, but I'm reading this off of my phone because I want to make sure that I capture the essence of the story of impact. Showed him the readers and the appropriate level, and then showed him the world language collection. The staff pointed out that some of those books would be perfect for the level for his second grader. And while his son read in English, the dad could also read in Amharic. So he could also follow with the story. They pulled several books off the shelf. They were able to check them out. And the dad was just thrilled to be able to see books in the language that he grew up with. This is another really important thing. I remember being in a panel during ALA Midwinter here in Denver in 2019. And one of the panelists was someone that worked for the one of the refugee resettlement agencies. And he was pretty honest, and this was in 2019, so we had been doing this work for a while, but our world languages collection wasn't as robust as it was. And he was pretty honest in saying, I walk into one of the Denver public libraries and I don't see myself reflected in the staff, in the languages, in the collection. And after he was done talking, it was my turn to talk, and I told him that I appreciated him for the insight, and that that was something that we were trying to correct. We were trying to be more intentional in hiring folks from the community that we were serving, and that we really wanted our staff to reflect the community that we were serving. And we also knew that back in 2019, our language capacities were very, very limited. And I think we've done some work where we've improved in some areas, but we definitely still have a lot of work to do. But I think we're going in the right direction. I think we still need to diversify our staff way more than it is right now. The Plaza program has created an avenue where we'll have, I would say, from my cultural inclusivity department, the majority of my staff started working as activity leaders and now are in positions where they are the folks that get to lead programs and get to develop programs to serve their communities. We sometimes don't see this reflected in all of our branches, but we are definitely working towards removing some of the barriers that maybe come around hiring folks. Like, I think this is a really good example of, if the same person that made the statement were to walk into one of the libraries now, I would hope that maybe he would say, hey, things are getting a little bit better, but there's still some work to do, which is kind of where I see where Denver Public Library is right now. I don't have a slide for this, but I do want to talk about some of the challenges of serving multicultural communities, particularly that I have seen throughout my career. When I started at the High Plains Library District, one of the biggest issues that I had that wasn't funding, because funding is always going to be a big one. We're always competing with funds. was promotion, or I don't know if so much promotion, but really getting staff buy-in from our administration. I was up in Northern Colorado. I was one of the few Spanish-speaking staff that we had. And I had received a grant to launch a Spanish GED class to help some of our Spanish speakers that wanted to further continue with their education and wanted to get the GED, to create a space for them to be able to practice and study all under the guidance of a teacher. And I remember that we had very little flexibility or freedom to create our own promotional materials. And I remember having a conversation with our public information officer that wanted me to create everything in English so she could approve it and then have it translated into Spanish. And as a native Spanish speaker, I was like, well, it's easier for me to just create something in Spanish. Like if you would just put some trust in your staff and know that I'm not saying anything crazy, I'm just promoting a GED program, it's going to be beneficial for everyone. With it seems so convoluted that I would have to write something in English so that she could approve and then turn around and translate it into Spanish. But those are some of the challenges that I think a lot of us face when it comes to serving multicultural communities. Whether it's the lack of staff that speak the language, or it's, you know, administration saying something that I've heard over and over again: these people don't come into our libraries, which was another message that I got when I worked at High Plains Library District. I wanted to create some displays to promote our Spanish collection and start a Spanish computer class, and I in one of the rural branches in Colorado, and they told me basically no, because these people don't use the library, which was incredibly offensive. And I did it anyways. And that was when I transitioned from one branch to another. The last computer class that I had at that branch had 12 participants. And it was kind of like, don't tell me that these people don't come to the library. They don't come because of people like you that have that attitude, that aren't willing to put in the work and take the risk to create programs that will bring them into the library. So that is clearly a huge obstacle. Trying to convince administration has been something that was, for the first 10 years of my career, was very challenging. It got a little bit better when I started at DPL. Obviously, the Plaza program had kind of demonstrated the need for this type of programming for the Denver Public Library, but we were still facing some challenges around funding. The program is grant funded, the Plaza program is grant funded. And at any moment when those grant funds go away, so does our ability to serve our multicultural community. And it has been a struggle to have the library absorb that into the general fund. We have certainly made a lot of progress in the last 5 years, but it hasn't gone as quickly as I would hoped for. Typically, you know, we apply for grants to try to test something, and if it works, you'd want your library to absorb that, because the initial investment, someone else did that initial investment, and now you've been able to iron the program out. It's working great. The community appreciates it. It's time for the library to absorb that into the general fund. And that's something that, to this day, part of the program, actually the majority of the program, is still grant funded. And we have a couple more years left in the grant. But again, at that point, I'm working really hard to either identify a new grant that's going to keep this program alive, or go back to my administration and try to convince them again, look at the last 15 years and what we've been doing for the Plaza program. It's time that we absorb this chunk of work into the general fund. And then a big one too has been hiring staff. There's a lot of barriers when it comes to doing interviews, how our job applications are written, having a bunch of white people just sitting across a table and interviewing an immigrant or somebody who's non-white can be very intimidating. So we've done a lot of work to try to remove some of those barriers and to try to, I think we just recently started supplementing experience for education too. We also know that college degrees and library degrees can be very, challenging for folks to have. And we want to be able to give our immigrant community a good opportunity to be able to apply for our jobs and not always give the job to the most privileged person who obviously is going to do well at the library, right? Or I'm sorry, doing interviews. There has to be a little bit more responsibility on hiring managers to do a little bit of extra work and maybe training maybe it'll take just a little bit more work to train someone to get them to where you want them to be, but it's going to be well worth it at the end if we get that diversity within our staff. So that's basically what I just wanted to talk about, the Denver Public Library and some of the strategies that we've done and the Plaza program and some of the things that I see that are successful strategies for serving multicultural communities. Obviously, I'm missing a lot of things. I haven't really talked about signage in libraries, which is another big thing, or even translations in libraries. But I know that I had some limited time and I wanted to be able to talk a little bit more about the National Associations of Librarians of Color, which are always great resources if you're thinking about doing some sort of programs. They're listed on the screen and you can, and I know that I have ODLOS up there, the Office of Diversity, Literacy and Outreach, which is not a National Association of Librarians of Color. But they have done some really good work with one of their subcommittees, which is called Serving Refugee, Immigrants, and Displaced Persons. That I would invite everyone to check the work out that they've been doing. I was chair of that subcommittee 3 or 4 years ago. But these are great places to start building up your network and connect with these folks, because there are so many people out there that are doing such great work. And I think it's great to be able to recognize the work that they're all doing and to learn from them. But I really wanted to focus on some of the stuff that Reforma has been doing. I'm the current president of Reforma. I'm looking forward to June of 2022 when I can pass that off to Romelia, who's our current vice president. Reforma was established in 1971 by Arnulfo Trejo. And you'll notice that it's a pretty lengthy name. It's the National Association to Promote Library and Information Services to Latino and the Spanish speaking, which is something that Reforma did intentionally, instead of just saying that they're the National Association of Latino, Latina, Latinx librarians. We wanted to make sure that Reforma was open to anyone who really has a passion for promoting library and information services to Spanish speakers. You don't have to be Latino, Latina, or Latinx. You don't have to be Spanish speakers. Anyone can join and help us further the mission of Reforma. And some of the things that I wanted to highlight were the Children in Crisis Task Force, which was established in 2014 with Oralia Garcia de Cortez and Patrick Sullivan. And I think Lucia Gonzalez was also part of that, where they saw a huge need for all those children that were being incarcerated in the borders to provide them with books or to provide them with some sort of something to try to give them some sort of like hope or whatever it was that they could do. But they were putting together backpacks with books and then going to the detention centers and handing those out to those children. And that task force has been doing such amazing work over the last 7 years. And we continue to support the work that they do and try to promote it as much as we can. Hopefully you're all familiar with the Pura del Pre Awards. We just did the ones for this year, well, I guess for last year during ALA Midwinter, where we announced the winners for children's literatures. There's some amazing books there. If you're looking for book lists, you can always check out the Pura del Pre Awards for any ideas that you might want to have in creating displays. Reforma recognizes the importance of storytelling as a way to preserve culture. And during ALA Annual, we do a Noche de Cuentos. And I invite, if any of you have the opportunity to attend ALA Annual this year in Washington, DC, we're still trying to figure out where we're going to do this. But last time in 2019, when ALA was in DC, we did the Noche de Cuentos event in the Hispanic Reading Room of the Library of Congress. And it was such a wonderful evening. We had Shushi Morales there. So I would invite all of you to kind of keep an eye open for that if that's something that you're interested in. We also provide grants for libraries to be able to do their own Noche de Cuentos programs, along with Dia del Niño grants, where we provide grants for libraries to develop their own programs to promote early learning and to promote both Noche de Cuentos and the art of storytelling and Dia del Niño events. And then finally, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is Reforma offers scholarships for students that are currently enrolled in IMLS classes. I believe they're up to $1,500, and our scholarship application is currently open through March 5th, if I remember correctly. But all of this information is on the Reforma website, which is reforma.org. And if you know anyone who can benefit from a scholarship, I would invite you to reach out to them and encourage them to apply for the scholarships. And that's my presentation. That's what I have. I've been speaking for about 42 minutes. And now I'm ready to just answer some questions and go from there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Diaz. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, you could raise your hand and I can call on you, or if you want to put it in the chat box if you don't feel comfortable. I do see one from Sarah Pete, and her question is your library using any ARPA funds for any parts of the Plaza program?
That's a great question. We're not using any ARPA funds specifically for the Plaza program, but the ARPA funds have allowed us to free up, to hire a couple more folks and maybe to free up some of our general fund money that then we've been used to buy some supplies, but not directly related to support the Plaza program. But that's a really good question.
Okay. Mr. Diaz, we actually have another one too. Thank you so much for that response. Susan asked, could you talk more about the numerous Reforma chapters?
Hi, Susan. Thank you for that question. I know there's always something that I forget in my presentation, so I'm glad when people bring it up. We have a lot of chapters throughout the country. And we have one, for example, here in Colorado. We have a couple in Texas. We have a Northeast chapter, several in California. But if you want to become a chapter, a Reforma member, and there's not a chapter in your area, we do have thank you so much, Adriana. I was just about to paste that link. We have a lot of, we have member at large, a member at large chapter. But yeah, when you become a Reforma member, you do have the option of becoming a member of your chapter, which helps. The membership dues, 50% of it goes back to that chapter so that the chapter can really work more at a local level with libraries and folks that are in that area. Thank you so much, Susan, for reminding me of that. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. And you actually have a couple of more questions. You have one from Melinda. Melinda asked, could you please repeat the name of the course at University of Denver?
I want to say that I don't remember what it was called, but I want to say it was just called like serving multicultural communities or serving underserved populations.
Okay.
But I remember that Camila was teaching it and it was such a good class, but I don't really remember the name of it. Sorry. I can look it up if you want to, and I can reach out to you if you want to send me a private email message with your email. I can definitely do that if you're if you're interested. It's been so long since I followed up with DU and their curriculum that I know that Camila doesn't teach it, but I don't know if somebody is teaching it or not.
I'll make sure. She said she'll DM you, I believe. Okay. And Becky asks, how do you recruit activity leaders?
Great question, Becky. Virginia, who is the Plaza Program manager, is the person who does all the recruitment. And we obviously post on the Denver Public Library website when we post, but we also do a lot of referrals. There's a listserv here that's called the CARES Network, which is a lot of different organizations that work with, we all work with the same communities. And so really sharing something on this CARES Network has really gotten us some really, really good candidates. But also it'll be other activity leaders that would encourage folks from their community to apply. We give out interview questions as far as 24 hours in advance. Obviously with COVID, our interviews have changed a little bit. Sometimes they'll be virtual, sometimes they'll be in person. But we try to make it as easier as possible for the candidates, try to remove as much interview anxiety as we can. They're pretty laid back interviews too. But I hope that helps answer your question. And when we recruit activity leaders, we typically post for anywhere between 5 to 10 activity leaders.
Awesome. Mr. Dow has his hand raised. Mr. Dow, would you like to ask a question? I'm sorry, Dr. Dow. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Hi, it's Myra Dow, and I just put it in the chat too. I guess I'm just excited to talk to you. I love the idea of no library cards and no registration. You just briefly mentioned that and went right on. It was such a natural thing for you to say. And I know I hear all the time that it's such a barrier for many immigrants to have to provide ID. And so I wondered if you could elaborate on that just a little bit more.
Yeah, that's for all of our programs. We won't require any library cards or any registration. Some programs might require registration if we have limited capacity, but for the Plaza program, anybody can drop in. And again, we don't ask for a library card or registration. However, if somebody does want to get a library card, we do accept so many different forms of ID. We even accept like Mexican consulate cards, literally any. We've even accepted inmate ID cards as a form of identification for folks to get library cards. Another barrier that we removed is for adults, they do have to prove that they have some sort of address. But if somebody comes into the library, say a person who just was recently released from jail and says, hey, I want to just get a library card so I can check some stuff out. I only have this one ID, but I don't have any proof of address. We'll still give them what we call a provisional card, which allows them to check up to 3 items. It can be any items. We don't care what they check out, but while they don't have a full privileged library card, we still feel like that's fair enough to be able to provide some sort of access for folks that might not be able to prove address.
Oh, thank you for, yeah.
I do want to say though, that was a point of contention during some of our Plaza programs and the past administration when there was a big push to deport folks. There was a constant worry that because we don't require registration, we don't ask for ID, that we could have ICE officers come to our Plaza programs to try to find people to deport. What we started doing was doing Know Your Rights classes during the Plaza programs. We had the little red cards that we handed to all of our Plaza participants. We were part of the Rapid Response Network, that if we ever saw ICE, there was a phone number that you could call. And there were a lot of immigration attorneys that would just show up at your location to kind of do ad hoc legal representation. Luckily, that never happened at one of our branches, but that was definitely a huge concern of us because of how open our programs were, that they could also be targeted for hate crimes too, but luckily it never happened.
Oh, that's good news. I wanted to say that just a short time ago, I had the pleasure of attending a naturalization ceremony at the federal courthouse in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And the courthouse was packed with people who were becoming citizens that day. And right outside the door was a public librarian who was all set up. She didn't stand behind the table. She stood in front of the table and she was there to register people to vote. And those people all stood in lines, filing out of that courtroom to sign up. And I just hope everybody that has a chance to do that, I think you understand how important that is, and you're working toward making things happen. I just wanted to share that.
Mr. Diaz, you have a lot of kudos. And I think those are all the questions. Are there any more questions?
I see Adriana, I can definitely share job descriptions with you. I'll email those over to you. I think.
And also I posted your social media, your Twitter handle. And if you want to share your email address, when we send out an email in the upcoming days to include the recording, we can also add any documentation that you want to share with them to include your email address and any additional handouts. Yes, I agree. Everyone has said this has been so great, and I completely agree. Thank you so much, Mr. Diaz. Do you have any final words, or you have anything, any lasting words for?
I appreciate the platform. I know that there's a lot more that I didn't get into that I'm probably missing. I encourage all of you to build up your networks if you want to improve your programs. Adriana is one of the participants. She's hope that I don't get her title wrong, she's the outreach manager for the New York Public Library. I remember meeting her and a couple of other colleagues from Houston Public Library, Brooklyn, and Los Angeles Public Library, where we shared this common passion for working with underserved communities and multicultural communities. And we rely on each other every day when we have questions. It's so easy to just be able to send Adriana an email and be like, hey, how do you guys do this? Or, hey, I'm running into this like problem. Any insights or any help that I haven't been able. And Reforma has been a great platform for me to build up those networks. I would invite all of you to check out the different National Associations of Librarians of Color, join, be active. And know that there are folks out there that, you know, if you have any questions or you need any advice, or you just like, there are people out there that are passionate and that would love to sit down and have conversations with you around this, because all in all, we're all in it to help our community, and the more resources that we can have to help our community, the better.
Mm-hmm. And I have added the link to join Reforma. And again, thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Diaz. You are truly amazing.
Thank you so much.